예, 안녕하십니까. 저는 칼폴라니연구소 소장 홍기민이라고 합니다. 아침부터 이렇게 박수치 마시고. 예, 아침부터 이렇게 이런 시간에 이렇게 와주셔서 대단히 감사하고요. 그래서 오늘 저희가 준비한 행사가 여러분 오신 정성에 충분히 보답이 되기를 바라고 또 저는 될 거라고 믿습니다. 그래서 오늘 아주 보람차고 가성비 높은 하루가 됐으면 좋겠습니다. 그리고 제가 여기서 긴 말씀 드릴 필요는 없습니다. 조금 있다가 저희 기조연설을 맡아주실 미셸 바우엔스 선생님께서 오늘 왜 이런 행사를 마련했고 어떤 테마를 마련했는지 그게 역사적으로 어떤 의미가 있는지 그런 긴 호흡과 큰 맥락에서 말씀해 주실 것입니다. 그러니까 저는 또 중복해서 또 말을 못할 필요 없을 것 같고요. 한 가지만 말씀드리자면은 오늘 저희가 준비한 행사에 소망이 딱 하나 있다면은 커먼스라고 하는 건 이제 더 이상 추상적인 것이 아니고 학술적인 개념이 아니고 그냥 머릿속에 어떤 가능성이나 막연한 이야기가 아니고 이미 우리나라 곳곳에서 또 세계 곳곳에서 이미 실천적인 단계로 나가기 시작한 현실적인 우리들의 경제 활동의 조직 방식이다라는 점 여러분이 느끼셨으면 좋겠고요. 또 그게 디자인이라든가 또는 하이테크라든가 하는 어떤 특수한 부분에만 국한되는 것이 아니라 에너지라든가 식량이라든가 주거라든가 하는 우리의 기본적인 필요에도 가까이 와 있는 모든 사람들이 보편적으로 일상생활 속에서 해볼 수 있는 방법이다라는 얘기를 저희들이 하고 싶어서 오늘 행사를 준비했습니다. 따라서 오늘 오신 분들은 여러 가지 풍부한 사례들을 가지고 많이 말씀을 하실 거고 그래서 여러분들이 많이 궁금하신 거라든가 이런 게 있으면 많이 같이 참여해서 같이 토론하는 시간을 넉넉히 갖도록 저희가 준비를 했습니다. P2P 파운데이션이라고 하는 재단을 창립하신 분입니다. 여러분 많은 분들이 아시겠지만 P2P 파운데이션은 커먼스 운동하고 P2P 생산 운동을 결합시키는 데 있어서 결정적인 기폭제가 됐었던 중요한 의미를 가진 단체입니다. 이 창립자이신 미셸 바우엔스 선생님께서 여기 나와 있는 제목으로 우리 기조연설을 해주시겠습니다. 그러면은 미셸 바우엔스 선생님을 모시겠습니다. 예.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's third time in Seoul, I think, today. And you probably know the context. So yesterday we had a conference of the Future Innovation Forum, where Mayor Park basically said that he wants to move from the sharing paradigm to the commons paradigm as a way of thinking about transforming Seoul for the coming challenges. So, sometimes in politics we say things and then we have to see the reality of those things, but I think it's still very significant in any case that the commons is becoming part of our language in a way that it wasn't even 5 years ago. So something is happening. I would like to give some historical context also why the commons are coming to the fore in the last few years. So basically my presentation will be 10 minutes history, 10 minutes institutional changes, so how cities are changing in view of this, and then 10 minutes I want to basically talk to you a little bit about value. What is value and what does it mean when the commons come up and how it relates to the market and different parts of the economy. Okay, so just first to define the commons, which so that we know what we're talking about. That's important because, as you know, every word that we're going to use is always also abused. So when we talk about sustainability, it meant something different 30 years ago. Now it often simply means profitability of the company over time. But that was not what sustainability meant when we coined the concept. So it's the same thing with the commons. We have to be very careful what people mean when they use that concept. So basically the commons is best defined in a very simple way by just combining three elements. So it is a shared resource that is maintained by a community according to its own rules and norms. So you have three things. One, you could say it's a kind of an object. So it's when humanity or a group of people decides to manage something collectively rather than individually, right? Just to give you an example, and I will also explain why it's so important to do this. So in 2017, I was asked by the city of Ghent to do a commons transition plan for the city. And so we mapped 500 urban commons projects. I will explain later what that means. And we saw a tenfold growth of these projects since 2008. So in other words, there were about 50 urban commons in Ghent in 2006, 2008, and there were 500 of them in 2017. So that's a very significant growth rate of these kinds of practices. And so, okay, one example. So as you know, let's take cars, right? Our cars, when we have individual cars, stay on average in the garage or in the parking about 95% of our time. So this is a very heavy expenditure in steel, plastics, petrol. It's an object we're going to use only 5% of the time, right? There are things that are worse, like a drill is used 8 minutes on average in a lifetime. So everybody's buying drills in certain countries like the US, but they're not using them, right? So this is an enormous waste of resources when every individual thinks he needs something just in case, right? So if we have a car sharing association like in Ghent, which is called the Gage, you can say, okay, 5%, so let's double it to 10%. Let's say that we have, as a group, the neighborhood decides to manage the cars collectively, right? Not imposed by the state, this is just a free decision from a particular neighborhood. So basically, for 1,300 people, that was the case in 2017, you need 130 cars. With 130 cars, you can have a car whenever you want. Now, it's maybe not so nice as having your car in your garage waiting for you. I fully understand that this is the case. But when you're faced with certain constraints, like you don't have enough money to have a car, this is an interesting solution. So what are the advantages? First of all, the studies of these kinds of car sharing projects, and we're not talking about Uber, I will explain why this is important, is that there is a dramatic diminution of thermodynamic resources, use of thermodynamic resources, the human footprint on nature. How much do we use? So basically, one shared car in this particular commons environment will replace 9 to 13 private cars. And you're not losing your ability to have point-to-point mobility, right? This is what's important. This is not like public transport, where you never go to the end of your journey. You always have to combine different things. You can still go from one point to another point directly using one vehicle. The second thing is, when you replace 1,300 cars with 130 cars, the amount of money you need is drastically diminished as well. So this is the second advantage, is inclusion, right? So especially, let's assume that because of climate change and ecological crisis, that our societies are not going to grow as much as we used to, that there is less available in terms of income. So if you look at your own life, you could say, well, I'm going to be poor. Or you could say, maybe I can maintain all these services, but just at a lower level of expenditure. You still follow me, right? So in other words, you can imagine lifestyle decisions where you say, I want to maintain these complex services of modernity, and since our income is diminishing, if we mutualize, we kind of still increase our capacity to have fulfilling lives, because we have access to the freedoms, but at a dramatically lower financial cost. So this is about social inclusion. The third thing, of course, the third part of the definition of the commons is self-regulation. So in other words, the commons in this context, if it's an association or a cooperative, is also a school of democracy, right? It's the neighborhood, the association, the co-op, all the members of this project are going to be involved in the decision making in some way or other, right? So it has these three very important advantages, which is one, diminishing the human footprint while maintaining a level of complex services, diminishing our investment financially and thermodynamically, much less resources will be needed. And then the third thing, it's a relational wealth. It creates connections between people when they decide to manage. So that's what the commons is about. The commons is really very simply about mutualization and pooling of resources. So do we all need to have it individually? In some cases, we might say yes. But in some other cases, increasingly, we might say, well, it's really better if we share the resource together. We will all be better off if we do that. That's the kind of a choice that a society, groups, and individuals can make. And so this is not new. Commoning, the activity of creating and maintaining shared resources, is something that was actually, according to anthropologists, the primary means of living together. So very at the beginning of humanity, when small groups of people were roaming the earth, nomadic structures, they were pooling resources, right? The commoning was really the main way of organizing life. Then we started settling in villages and inventing agriculture. So then we invented the second form, which is called the gift economy. It's a bit different. The gift economy is, I give you something, and you feel that you have to give me something back, right? So we create social relationships through gifting, just to make sure you understand this is not the same as the commons, yeah? Because in the commons you have a common pool. In the gift economy, individuals or groups of people are giving, and then they get something back. So imagine if you have villages, you can no longer escape conflict. So you use the gift economy to pacify human relationships. Right? I'm going to give to my neighbors, they're going to give to me, we're going to be friends, and we maintain this kind of economic exchange. So this is complex tribal civilizations. And then one day, maybe it was a climate change event, and that's actually what historians are now looking at. Some drought somewhere, and some tribe decides the only way to survive is if we take it from somebody else, right? So that's when we basically start with our class structures and class societies, because once you take it from somebody else, you can't have the gift. You have to give something back. So, the Pax Romana, if you join the Roman Empire, you get roads, you get cities, but you have to listen to us, right? This is kind of the quid pro quo that we have. And then, of course, the market. So there is a history of the commons. I want to very briefly create that context. So the first commons were natural resources. And I'm pretty sure if you go back to the rural areas of Korea, you will still see a lot of that. I don't know what the word is they're using, but for example, in European history, in the Middle Ages, the farmers had their own land a little bit for the family. Then they had the land of the Lord, and they had to work to create, common infrastructures. That was called the corvée. And then they had the commons. So agreements between the village that this particular forest, this particular river could be used in a certain way. So there were rules to maintain the long-term sustainability of those resources. So if you would take a picture of the world today with a satellite, it's very clear. Japan is green, Austria is green, Switzerland is green. Indonesia is black and brown. The Amazon is black and brown. And so what's the difference is that in these countries, they manage the mountain flanks as a commons. So every village is in charge of maintaining the health of their environment through these common rules, right? So the commons are very, very good as a way to maintain natural resources. But then came capitalism, and capitalism divides people from their ownership of what they need to make a living. So then you have people who have property and other people who have their work. So once you have capitalism, you have what we call enclosures, right? The capital system eats up the commons, privatizes the commons. But they still exist, especially in the global south. But that kind of commons tend to disappear. And in the West, frankly, we almost lost them completely. There's very few commons left. So imagine these farmers, and they're chased away from their land. They have to come and work in the cities. This has happened from the 16th century onwards. And by the 19th century, by 1848, the average lifespan of an industrial worker in Manchester and Birmingham is 31 years. Right? So they die on average when they're 31. So what are they going to do? Well, what they will do is they will form social commons. They will mutualize the risk of life. So they create fraternities, they create unions, they create mutual insurance. And our welfare state, which I think exists in Korea, is the result of that, right? We privatized the natural resources commons, but we statified the working class commons, the social commons. And then we made it into a right for everyone instead of a self-organized activity. So I'm not sure it's bad, because it extended social security to everyone. Then the third phase, which is what I experienced when I was younger, probably about the time of that picture, is at the time when neoliberalism was telling us that life is all about competition, that we can't really trust other people, that we have to make sure that we survive as an individual, as a family, and make sure that we're stronger than other people. We invented the digital networks, and I know it's now very fashionable to say a lot of bad things about it, and there are a number of issues, but it did create a wave of knowledge commons. It created the open source movement, it created the Wikipedia, it created basically millions of people sharing knowledge together and constituting collective intelligence together. And so that's the third phase of the commons, the natural resource commons, the social commons, and then the knowledge commons. And to be very quick, because I know I'm taking up time here, basically 2008, the global systemic crisis, and I'll tell you about Europe because I know the situation better there. So all these young people that have been socialized with these networks and had up to 50% unemployment in Italy, in Spain, 30% in France. I don't know if you know this, and I don't know what the situation is in Korea, but I think this is a bit funny. The average age for an Italian person to stay with their parents is now 42. Okay, so this is a result of the crisis. Young people today can no longer buy homes if they don't have rich parents. This is the situation. So the poverty is hidden because we have this fat. Right? We have parents who have houses, so we stay home because it's cheaper to live that way. So this is a massive phenomenon. But these people, if they want to have a good life, are obliged to create commons. So that's why we have this wave of urban commons where civil society groups, I think a lot of groups, people here are part of that move, are said, okay, what we see is we need to do certain things. The state is not doing it. The market is not doing it. So we're going to do it. We want to have good organic food. We're going to organize ourselves. We want to have renewable energy. We're going to organize ourselves. This will be the next speaker. So this is a big wave of urban commoning that we had in the last 10 years. Very significant evolution. This is why Seoul, the Seoul mayor, wants to move in that direction. This is why Ghent asked for a commons transition plan. This is why Sydney just got a commons transition plan. So this is why cities are seeing this and are trying to deal with that situation. Okay, then we have a speaker today whose name is Jose Ramos, and he's coming from Melbourne with a few other people. And Jose will talk to us about the next shift, which is the shift to actual commons-based production, right? Because most urban commons are about redistributing. So we need housing, let's have collective co-op housing. We need mobility, let's have shared mobility and car sharing. But we're not making the cars, right? That's a big difference. But with energy and food, we have started to make it in a commons way. So, give you an example, I'm sure that exists here in Korea. When you have a community-supported agriculture project, right, collective purchasing of organic food. Now, of course, you can say the farmers are still individual farmers. You know, they might have their own land. And the consumers are still buying with their money food. But what they're doing is they're making their ecosystem as a commons. What happens here is that farmers and consumers will talk together and create a solidarity mechanism between themselves. Right? So it becomes a generative ethical market that is based on a common ecosystem that is run as a commons. Right? So the individuals are still free, they're still owners of their land, but they decide to mutualize their production and distribution system. The same with renewable energy. When you create a renewable energy co-op, you're making your own energy and distributing it amongst the members of the co-op. So, okay, very briefly, I'm sorry, because I always like to give kind of frameworks for thinking about the commons. I'm just reading a really interesting book. It's called Havoc, which means like a word for chaos. Dynamics 21st Century, this is the title of the book. And then the subtitle says Thermodynamic Isolation and the World Order, right? Because humans cannot live separate from nature. So we have always to think, what is the state of nature? What kind of society can we have given the state of nature? And so when he looks at history, the name is Peter Pogani of this man. He believes that there is a kind of pulsation in history, right? And here's how it goes. You have a system, more or less stable. It no longer works, it goes into crisis, you have a chaotic transition, and then after some time you have a new stable system. And this is the history of humankind, right? Think about civilizations. All civilizations collapse, all of them. And there is a study called HANDY, Human and Nature Dynamics, that shows this. And here's the thing, interesting thing. The commons are always the answer to crisis. So the pulsation in history is between class systems that compete with each other. So if you're Korea, you're competing with other countries. And in order to do this, we tend to overexploit our own resources, right? And then there is crisis, and then something will happen. And in the past, it were religious revolutions. There's a wonderful book about that. It's called Ecological Revolutions and the Eggshell Religion, showing how every time this happened in the past, you know, some monk would say, we have to change this, bad people are destroying our earth and, you know, forgetting the divine rules. And then something would happen in society, and society would be reorganized. This happened in Japan in the 12th century. Japan was completely deforested. Then you have these new Buddhist fraternities, I think it's Nichiren and stuff came up. And the emperor took the land became a commons of the emperor. And 150 years later, Japan was green again, right? So this is the kind of pulsation. So here's the story today. So we had the invention of, let's say, the modern systems as of the 16th century and the Industrial Revolution. And this ended in crisis around the time of the French Revolution. So we have a stable system, the mercantile capitalist system. Enters into crisis 1789 to 1830. The French Revolution, Napoleon, civil wars in Europe all over. And then we get the Smithian, from Adam Smith, capitalist system, which is based on freedom of enterprise, but doesn't take into account labor. Capital has full dominion over labor, and people who work die very young, right? And this entered into crisis in World War I to World War II. So we have Global System 1 that doesn't take into account labor, and Global System 2, which is our system that we had until 2008, where society learned to take into account the demands of labor. And the state becomes also responsible for the welfare of the people. But what we don't do is take into account the demands of the environment, right? We don't have a system, even if we realize climate change, we are still living as if it wasn't true. This is even true for many activists. So we are, in our system today, not really able, in terms of consciousness and practice, to take into account the thermodynamic limits of our society. So this is, I think, what we're living now. We have a thermodynamic, chaotic transition where the task ahead for humanity is to take into account nature and the environment. So GS3, Global System 3, after a period of chaos, is going to be a world, hopefully, if we get there, that actually knows how to do this, right? That we know how to live within the limits of a finite planet. And this is where the commons play an enormous role, right? The commons is going to be to make the difference between a very harsh chaotic transition with wars and civil wars, or a smoother transition where we learn to reorganize ourselves, maintain complex systems. And I don't know if this is bad news or good news, but I think we are more or less condemned to do this, because today we have nuclear facilities where the half-life of nuclear is 10,000 years. So imagine we cannot just go back to a primitive situation, because we are all going to be fried, basically, right? So we need to do this transition while maintaining a level of complexity. And so I think the commons is going to be that thing. So very quickly, so let's see if I do this right. So this is the commons economy, basically, and I want to just stress this very little. So a commons is another value regime, right? The value regime you are used to is, I want to do something, I'm going to hire people, we're going to do business, make a profit, and this is so the value regime today is market value. Only something that which is scarce has value. Okay?
Michel, do you want to use it?
Yes, I like to move a little bit. So basically what we see today, if we look at the commons communities, and I studied this in Ghent, so what I'm telling you is that what we know about open source communities is also true for urban commons communities. I've seen by now analyzing them that they have the same logic. So how is the value created when you have a commons? It's created through contributions. Various people contribute to maintain the resource, and they're recognized for their contributions. If you want to make a living over time, because otherwise you're volunteering, and you know what that means, it means that after 5 to 10 years, the people who started the project are exhausted, and then they have difficulties to maintain the project, right? So there is an economic question. So what happens for successful commons projects is that they will try to make some kind of arrangement with market or state. Like, can we get subsidies, or can we create services that will maintain our livelihoods, right? So what we have is that around the commons, we will have actually economies. So think about open source, Linux. We have IBM, we have Red Hat. Think about geolocation, which is a commons in the US. The geolocation information is shared. We have a huge geolocation industry based on that shared resource, right? And then the key question here is, and this is very important for people in the commons, is this an extractive relationship? Are they exploiting and weakening the commons? Or is this a generative arrangement where the commons and the market can grow together? So we're not talking about abolishing the market here. We're thinking about, can we create market forms that are not extractive, right? Can we have co-ops, companies, B corporations, co-ops that behave in a certain way so that the natural and human commons thrive in this relationship rather than weakens the relationship? Okay, the middle one. So this is the open productive community with open contributory dynamics. And this is the, actually call it the entrepreneurial coalition. So you have the entrepreneur. I don't know if you know what that means in English. It means taking in between. So the language we use actually tells us that this way of dealing with the world isn't extractive. It's based on an extractive mentality. So I rather call this entrepreneurial coalition. And here's the third. So some people think this is all spontaneous, this is all horizontal, this is all purely, no. If you look at the commons, they always have institutions. Commons that succeed create NGOs, foundations, associations that maintain the infrastructure of cooperation. But the big difference before is they don't tell you what to do, right? So the Wikimedia Foundation doesn't tell anybody in the Wikipedia what to write, but they maintain the servers so that the system can continue. And what I'm trying to tell you is this is also a new social system. This could be the society of tomorrow, because we have a civil society that has become productive. Every citizen, inhabitant actually contributes something to the common good and to certain commons. So we have a productive civil society. Today we don't have that. Today we think that civil society is what you do as a volunteer after you come home tired from work, right? So there's no recognition today that this is a value-generating system. Okay, so this could be a new state, right? Because what they do is facilitate and enable the commons. So when we talk about a partner state, that's what we mean. We mean not saying this is what you have to do, like for climate change. This is what you have to do, almost like an ecological dictatorship. No, you have to diminish your carbon. You do this how you want to do this. But we will reward you. The more carbon the more you decarbonize, we will reward you. But we don't tell you how to do it. That would be a partner state function, right? I hope you get that logic. And of course, this is the ethical economy. So when we're talking about transforming the state, transforming civil society, and transforming the market at the same time, right? But instead of market-centric, it becomes common-centric. Okay, very quickly now, because I know I talk too much. No, so this is... okay, I kind of don't have too much time, so I just want to say this is what's happening in a number of cities. So we come out of an era of public-private partnerships, the market state, the state at the service of the market, and we make a transition to a public commons partnership, the state as a facilitator of commons-oriented activities, right? And this started in Italy with the Bologna regulation for the care and regeneration of the urban commons, with 150 cities now doing this in Italy. We have similar rules in Holland and different countries. So this allows a formalization, a institutionalization of cooperation between civil society and the state. This is very interesting. Because I don't know if you know Eleanor Ostrom, who studied the commons. She said commons only survive when they're recognized by the public authorities, right? So they don't exist totally independently of the state. Because why? Very simply, if you don't have regulations, the police can come tomorrow and close you down, right? So you have to negotiate and have some power as a commons to have rules that allow you to exist. And this creates a requirement for engagement with the city, with the different structures that exist. So basically, how this works is you have a lab, a city lab, co-city lab, and so the citizens know if they want to do something, they can go there. So I want to take care of the river. I want to renew this park. I want to renew the square. You know where to go, right? And then this is Dutch, by the way, because I'm Flemish. So then we have the city as a director, as a kind of orchestra conductor, that will create a coalition to support the commons project. In this particular context, what do we need to do to help people to do this well, right? So let me give you an example. So let's take energy. So there was, and you probably know the name, I don't know the name of the lady, which I saw yesterday. So in Germany, where 60% of energy is now co-op, citizen co-ops. How did it happen? It happened because one village fought for 5 to 10 years to have the right to do it. It was illegal. Then they succeeded. And then it took another 5 to 10 years for only 2 or 3% of the population to do this. And then we had Fukushima. The Greens were in the government, and they organized a feed-in tariff, right? So you see the dynamic, right? So people started, they innovate, the social civic innovation, but it doesn't really scale until you have this kind of agreement with the regulatory and legal world, right? And then, wow, then it goes, right? So this is why we need politics, right? We just can't do our own stuff. We need to talk to the mayor, we need to vote for the right people, we need to organize and create social power for the commons in order to change the regulatory environment in which we operate. Okay, now very quickly, I'm sorry, I need 5 more minutes. I'm going to go to a crucial issue here. So here's the big problem that we have in the capitalist system with the commons. So take 2 farmers. One farmer is using pesticides and all kinds of things to make it work, right? He's going to get all kinds of subsidies. It's 100 to 1, actually. If you are an organic farmer, so in other words, every year that you work, your soil is getting better, is getting healthier. You're decarbonizing, you're producing biochar, etc., etc. You're not polluting the water. The state doesn't have to pay to depollute your water, right? You're not getting any support, right? Or a little bit, maybe. But so this is the basic problem. The problem is with our current system, we only recognize market value, we tax market value, and then we redistribute, or we philanthropize, philanthropy, right? But there is no structural funding for regenerative activities. And as long as we don't solve this issue, we remain marginal players, using a lot of our energy and sweat, but we remain marginal because there's no recognition of a new value regime. And so in other words, we need to go to a society which recognizes contributions, generative contributions to the common good. So I want to end you with one possible way to do this, which is a European project, but I really like it. So an Austrian person called Christian Felber, he looked at all the constitutions in Europe, and he said, remarkably, every constitution says that the economy should serve the common good. There's not a single constitution that says the economy should serve the profit of private shareholders. It's not in there. It's the practice, but it's not in there. So then the second step is, what is the common good? And some people will think, well, common good is something metaphysical. No, the common good is actually the basis of a social agreement. If you ask people what is the common good, about 95% of people will agree that the common good consists of certain things. And so let's make an accounting system, the common good economy accounting system, that looks at every entity in the world and its capacity to create the common good. Yes, you have to have a balance sheet that you can't make losses all the time, but you have the balance sheet is 15% of this accounting system. 85% is common good impact. Now imagine the following: the city of Seoul says we're going to give subsidies to the people and the entities which have the highest common good score. Are we going to tax the people who create the least common good? That, I think, is a genius proposition, because we don't have to abolish anything. You still have companies, you still have CEOs, but as a society we start judging them differently, right? And so these are mechanisms that we need. We need mechanisms that recognize generative activity. So we need to change our value regime. I'll just conclude with just an historical example so you get it. So what's the difference between the Roman Empire and the medieval system in Europe? With Christianity coming and replacing. Well, in the Roman Empire, work was bad. If you are elite, your dream is to not work, make other people work, and you can then do philosophy and become a good person. So in other words, work was bad. And then the Christians come, and they say, we have to pray and work. So in other words, what Christianity did in Europe is change the value regime, right? By changing the value regime, by saying work is something good, they create a new type of society. And so now this is the same thing. We have a value regime which values extractive activity only. So it has to be scarce to have value. Yeah. And therefore, the incentive is, if you're a corporation, and I worked for corporations for 30 years, I really know how this works, is how can we make the things scarce, right? Have you ever wondered why you don't have fiber everywhere? Very simple. If you're telco and you have fiber everywhere, you can't sell connectivity. It's abundant. You destroy the market. So a telco will never ever create a fiber internet for all. It can't do it. It's a suicide, right? So that's why capitalism is not just scarcity management, it's scarcity engineering, right? So we're going to make Terminator seeds that forces the farmer to buy new seeds every year because the seeds don't grow by themselves. So we are actively destroying natural abundance. So we need to develop a commons economics, which look at natural balance, natural regeneration, and how can we create a society where every economic activity is a win-win activity, not a win-lose activity, right? So this is not going to be easy, but I think people like you, conscious or maybe not so conscious, that's what you're doing, right? You're thinking in this way, and what the commons movement should do is create a narrative that allows all your efforts to be seen as part of this big transition. I think this is the important thing, right? So you do energy, and you think you're doing energy, and you're doing food, and you think I'm alone. You're not alone. There's literally millions of people that are doing this. This is a real conclusion. So just to give you an example, I went to Amsterdam already 10 years ago, and we had a map of the sharing economy. And I don't know if you know how that works in Google, you get these red dots, right? So there was so much going on in Amsterdam that you could not see the map. So in every street of Seoul, there are good people transforming their lives and transforming their neighborhoods and transforming. And so this is what we need to do. We need to really understand we're doing the same thing. And we don't need a party telling us do this, do that. We need to coordinate. We need to align our efforts so that organic food can help renewable energy can help shared mobility can help shared housing, etc. So this is, I think, what the big task is today. Thank you for your attention.
저는 아주 흥미있게 들었습니다. 그래서 제 무딘 입으로 하신 말씀을 제가 다시 요약할 필요는 전혀 없을 것 같고요. 이제 그러면은 본격적으로 얘기로 들어가겠습니다. 단 한 가지만 맨 마지막에 우리 미셸 선생님께서 글로벌 커먼스 경제학을 만들자라는 말씀을 하셨지요. 예. 그 저희 그 연구소로 저희 칼폴라니 연구소도 지금 그걸 목표로 하고 있고요. 이 이야기를 오늘 끝날 때 얘기를 다 정리할 때 저녁에 제가 마지막으로 정리할 때 이 문제를 다시 한번 좀 말씀을 드릴 테니까 좀 기억을 해주시기 바랍니다.